Okay, so the first talk of our summit is by Francis Jayakanth with the topic Enhancing the Discoverability of Library-Hosted Resources, a case study with VuFind. Francis is from the Indian Institute of Science, and yeah, I welcome you to the summit.
Thanks a lot. Thank you very much, Andre, and very good evening, very good morning or good evening to all the listeners and participants. I take this opportunity to thank Damien and his team for giving me an opportunity to share my limited experience in using VuFind. I started using VuFind back in 2012 and 13. Did some experimentation then, but then because of various reasons, I couldn't pursue with it. And then there was a discontinuation. And then when I saw the recent announcement about the 2020 Summit of VuFind, I thought I should get started with again and try to contribute a contribution this time. So I just started working for about a month, since about a month's time. And then thanks to help from Damien and his team, I was able to set up a very basic version of VuFind to facilitate discoverability of the resources of our institute hosted by the library. So this is the aerial view of, I just take a few minutes to tell you something about my institute and my library, and then I'll tell you what we did with VuFind for our institute. So this is the aerial view of my institute. This is the main administrative building of my institute. It's called as the Tower Building or the Central Office, and this is one of the iconic buildings of our city. The institute was established way back in 1909. It's more than 110-year-old institute, and spread across 400 acres of land. And this is one of the greenest institutes in the country. So the institute itself became a reality by the visionary partnership between an industrialist called Jayakanth, the then Mysore royal family, the government of India, and its country's one of the top universities in the country for research and advanced education in sciences and engineering. So in terms of numbers, we have about close to 4,200 students. It's a mid-sized institute. We have less than 5,000, about 4,200 students. And then these students pursuing for their PhD, for other master's programs. And about 4 or 5 years ago, Institute also started an undergraduate program. So there are different faculties from biological sciences to interdisciplinary research. There are 6 divisions actually, and total number of faculty and scientific staff about 520. Institute publishes, the main activity of any research institute, as to be expected, is research publications, and then we publish close to about 3,000 research papers in journals and conferences and in the form of books and books chapters. And then most of these publications are in the top tier journals published in international journals. So annually about 900 students graduate from our institute. So this is the front view of our library. This building itself came into existence around 1965. Before the completion of this building, the library was operating from the main building, which I showed you in the first slide. So library moved into the present premises in 1965. So the main objective of the library is to support the research and the education academic program of the institute. So for this, we have been building a rich collection of peer-reviewed scholarly literature. So our total collection in terms of print volumes, I don't have a slide for that, but just quoting it from my memory, is close to about 500,000, the printed volumes comprising of books and bound volumes. So this apart, we have access to about 20,000 plus online journals, about 25,000 ebooks, about 25 to 30 research databases. So the primary objective of the library is to support the research and the academic programs of our institute. And the secondary objective is to serve as a resource center for the scholars in the country. Now, there are many universities and colleges in the country which are not very resourceful in terms of having access to online resources or even offline resources. So many of them, they rely on our library. They make use of mostly the print resources for their academic and research activities. So these are the two main objectives of our library. So I've just listed some of the IT-based services that library has been offering. Our library was one of the earliest to set up the institutional repository services. In fact, we experimented with ePrint software way back in 2001 and actually implemented it in 2002. So we started with an institutional repository for the research publications of our institute, which is close to 3,000 now. And then in 2005, when DSpace made its appearance, we experimented with DSpace, and then we are using DSpace for managing our digital for our thesis and dissertations. Then Institute has been publishing a journal. It's called as the Journal of the Indian Institute of Science, and it started its publication in 1914. So we have the archival collection from 1914 to 2016. And then from 2017 onwards, it is being published in collaboration with Springer, and it's available on the Springer Link platform. So one of the offices of the Institute has digitized the entire archival collection of the journal, and library is hosting it by using open source software called as OJS system. And then it's available online. Since it was developed by an institute called InflibNet in the country. So we are making use, started a couple of months ago. The idea of this initiative is to showcase the data related to institute for both for the public and for the internal consumption. So this is presently available on the intranet only. And then during the recent unprecedented situation, which has risen out of the COVID pandemic, there was a heavy demand for people to access online resources from off-campus sites. Now, although we have a VPN access to access the online resources from off-campus sites, but many of our students and faculty were not able to use the VPN access easily to get connected to online resources. So we quickly set up a Shibboleth IDP-based access so that they could use their email credentials to access online resources. We also run a discussion forum called the LIST Forum, which was started in 1994. This is basically for creating a virtual network of library professionals in the country, and there are some registration from foreign countries as well. And then recently, since about a month or so, we started developing interest in VuFind. Now, basically, we thought we would be able to overcome some of the limitations that the Shibboleth-based access to online resources by implementing VuFind. But it appears that a lot more work needs to be done, and then we need to negotiate with a lot of publishers to get the metadata so that it can be indexed, and then it can, the VuFind can overcome some of the limitations that the Shibboleth-based access to online resources. So these are just the screenshots of our institution repositories, one for our publication, the other for our thesis and dissertations. This is the Journal of the Indian Institute of Science, which is available online, and the entire archival content spanning for the duration 1914 to 2016 is available through this platform. This is the screenshot of the Office of Data. This is the screenshot of the faculty profiles. Okay, so coming to VuFind, VuFind implementation at the library. So the objective was to create a single interface. Now, as I said, we host several of institutes' resources, from publications, repository, to theses, to online journals, and of course, the catalog through our library management system. Now, each of these resources have their own user interfaces. Now, we were trying to explore how VuFind can help our end users in using a single interface to create to host all our locally hosted resources and make it accessible through VuFind. So that's what's the objective. And as I said in the beginning, to explore the possibility of facilitating discoverability of online resources through VuFind for off-campus access. So what we have done so far, we installed one of the latest versions of VuFind, 7.0. So since then, 7.0.1 has come out, so it to be upgraded. And as we know, VuFind depends on several other technologies and software like the Apache HTTP server, MySQL, PHP, Java, JDK, and Solr. So VuFind has an excellent documentation available through their wiki pages. And then I just followed the installation wiki page from vufind.org and went about installing VuFind and then indexing some of the content that the library hosts for our institute. Our setup, we have set up a VuFind on a virtual machine on the cloud, and then the virtual machine is running Cent operating system version 7. So I followed the instruction that you can see on the screen, and the instructions are very clear and straightforward. So I had no problem in installing VuFind on our Cent OS on the virtual system. So depending on the setup of the operating system that you have, whether a virtual machine or whatever system you are using, so some of these software like the HTTP server, the MySQL, or the MariaDB or the PHP scripting language, these could have already been installed along with the operating system, or if required, you may have to set it up by following the installation instructions. Okay, so software is available from the link shown there. We downloaded the software and then followed the instructions as per the installation instructions given in the installation page. Now here I'm referring to 7.0.1, but actually I installed 7.0. So this is straight from the installation wiki page. Okay, so being a novice to VuFind, I just followed the default installation and didn't try to experiment with it much, because once one gains familiarity with the software, then we can think about experimentation. So to begin with, I would recommend to use the default setup, default installation instructions in setting up and then experimenting with VuFind. Okay, so download it and move it to the location as indicated there, and then we just need to run a script called php install.php that which sets up the VuFind. Okay, now one of the important thing that this script does is it prompts. There are a couple of prompts. Okay, one is it asks where would you like to store your local settings. Now the default local settings is in the user local VuFind local subdirectory. This is as far as CentOS is concerned, and it may differ from platform to platform. And then it also prompts whether you would like to, what module name would you like to use. Now, if you're going to make any changes to the code, then it will store those changes that you make, local changes that you make. So that's what the second prompt is about. And then, as I said, being a fresh user, we just accepted the default, which means that you're not going to use, it's going to be blank, none. And then the base path, how would VuFind will be accessible? So you have the fully qualified domain name followed by VuFind. That's also again the default thing. And then we accepted and proceeded with the setup. So there are a couple of other things that needs to be done once you install the software. Okay, so you need to set up some environmental variables, and also the Apache needs to know where the files related to VuFind reside on your file system. So all these instructions are clearly given in the installation instructions. So just follow that and we'll be able to set up VuFind. Okay, then once all the uh, environmental variables and then other settings are done, okay, we need to restart the Apache server, and then we need to configure VuFind. Now, VuFind will use a backend database. It could be either MySQL or MariaDB. And then during the configure, all these parameters are specified: what the name of the database will be, the user associated with the database, and then what library management system will be used. And then in our case, because we use a very legacy, locally developed commercial software called Lipsys. So VuFind doesn't have the driver to connect with the Lipsys software. So in such instances, we need to select no ILS. That means no integrated library system. But then we can still export the data from the library system and then index it in VuFind. So VuFind install home. When you access that URL, you set up all the configuration for VuFind with reference to the library management system, the backend database user, and a few other things. Now, VuFind by itself can't do much, so we need to ingest data into VuFind. There are two ways by which the data can be ingested into VuFind. One is using the MARC format, data in the MARC format, and the other is from the XML format. Now, acquiring data, so there are, as I said, there are two ways. The software which are OAI compliant, for example, it could be DSpace or ePrints or OJS. Now, these software are compliant to a protocol called Open Archives Initiative for Metadata Harvesting. Now, we have implemented all these software, ePrints, DSpace, and OJS. Okay. Now, being OAI compliant, these repositories can expose their metadata. So all that we need to know is the OAI interface of these software. And once that is known, we can easily acquire data from these repositories. And the other format, as I said, MARC export. Now, all the ILM, the integrated library systems, okay, may or may not be OAI compliant, but then all the ILS facilitate in exporting the data in the MARC format. So you export the data from the ILS in MARC format, and then that exported data can be ingested into VuFind. So that's what we have done. From the OAI compliant repositories, we harvested data, and then from our integrated library system, we exported the data, and then the same data was imported into VuFind. So this is the ePrints repository screenshot. Now, the OAI interface for ePrints by default, it will be in the domain name of the repository followed by CGI and OAI2. So in our case, it will be ePrints. This is the domain name, eprints.iac.ac.in, and CGI OAI2 gives the OAI interface for the ePrint software for our instance. Okay. So our installation directory of VuFind is user local VuFind. Okay, and then the default directory for saving the local settings is the local directory. Okay. Now, when we install VuFind, it comes with all the configuration files. Okay. Now, it's a good idea not to touch the original files. So you always make a copies of these files. For example, oai.ini, which the harvester uses to know the parameters for the OAI harvesting. So you make a copy of that and then store it in a local directory, and the local directories are available under the local folder. So under local, you'll find harvest, you'll find import, and then it's a good idea to make a copy of any of the configuration files that we may make changes to, and have a copy of that in the local directory. So this is the oai.ini file, which was used to harvest the data from our ePrints repository. Okay, so the most important thing is you need to specify the URL to harvest the OAI data. Okay, so this is one of the important things, and the metadata prefix is oai.dc. So I just modify the basic things. Okay, so I'm not too sure about what all these parameters may mean. Okay, So I just modified whatever was required for my VuFind instance, and then it worked fine. Okay. So these are all the various parameters. Now, for example, the name that's specified here. Now, whatever data is harvested from our ePrints repository, that will be stored in a folder under harvest, and the name of that folder will be ePrints. Okay. So once you have configured oai.ini, so you are ready to harvest the data. So to harvest the data, you switch to the directory, the installation directory followed by harvest. That is where the harvest script is resides. Okay. And then we have made the required changes to the oai.ini. So you can harvest a single repository at a time, or you could harvest multiple repositories at a time. So it all depends how you have configured your oai.ini .ini file. So in my case, I'm just harvesting one repository at a time. So I have configured the oai.ini file to harvest data from my ePrints repository. So once the configuration file has been tuned as per the needs of my harvest, I just need to run this script. Okay. So PHP harvest.php will harvest the data, and then it will store under the folder called ePrints. Okay. Now this has been specified in the oai.ini file. Okay. So the next step is to modify a couple of parameters in the ePrints.properties file. Now this file resides under the VuFind import. The original file resides under VuFind import folder. Make a copy of that to the local import folder. And the two parameters that match the matters here is the institution and the collection. Now, the collection we just harvested will reside in this folder, and then the institute, I've given it as IAC ePrints. This is what will be displayed on the VuFind website. Okay. Now this file it uses to match the metadata elements. So once we have harvested successfully, and then we have modified the ePrints properties file, we are now ready to import that content into VuFind. So we just need to get to the folder local harvest, and then run this command batch import. No, I think probably this should be the VuFind harvest directory. So run this command, and this is the collection which we harvested from. This is the properties file which we modified, and this script will actually ingest the data into the indexer. So once that is done, our data which we harvested from the ePrints repository, it gets into the VuFind, and then if required, we may have to start the Solar indexer, and then we are ready to access it. Okay, so that is from the steps are similar from other repositories as well. It could be OJS or DSpace or whatever other repositories which are OI compliant. Okay. Now I'll just quickly go through our ingesting process from our library management system. So as I said, Libsys, we don't have a driver from VuFind. So I exported the record, and then just exported record in the mark format. And once we have the record in the mark format, we execute this script import mark sh, and then this will load the data into the VuFind. So a short demo, should I just give just a brief demo, or are we running short of time?
No, as we haven't got any questions yet, I think you have 5 more minutes left. So please.
Okay, fine. Just a moment, I will switch to my instance. Okay, so this is the VuFind setup that we have done. Some basic changes to the homepage customization based on the tutorial available on the wiki page. Okay, okay. So as you can see here, our library, from the library catalog, we have about 1.5 lakh of records. From our ePrints repository, I have some 50,000 plus records. From our thesis and dissertation repository, I have about for 4,000 plus records. From our journals, I have about 4,000 plus records. And then our catalog, we have two kinds of records. One is for the departmental libraries, which are purchased through their cash advances. And the other, this is the main library catalog, okay? So just to easily find out what books were bought from departmental grants and what books were bought through the main library. So I segregated these two, okay? Now these are the collections I could harvest, and of these, the e-prints, ETD and journals were harvested because they're all OAI compliant repository, and the library catalog data was exported and then imported into the VuFind, okay? I'm just still exploring and then trying to understand all the features that VuFind has, but the first look at the interface is so clean and so appealing that anybody who uses this will fall in love with this interface and the software and all the functionalities that it offers.
We do have one question coming in if you want to take the last 2 minutes or so to answer it, or if
Sure.
If time's too short, we can wait until after the presentation.
Yeah.
The question from Todd Olson: with the OAI harvesting, what scale have you worked with? How large of a system?
Sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Can you see the Q&A system on the bottom of your screen?
Just a minute.
I'm wondering if it would be easier to answer directly. If not, we can take this conversation in
Okay,
Slack.
with the OAI harvesting, what scale have you worked with? So is it in terms of number of records? So ePrints has about 50,000 records and our ETD repository has about 5,000 records. So, and OJS has about 4,000 records.
Okay, so thank you very much for your talk. I actually have one, okay, are you finished or do you want to talk?
Yeah, this is the last future plan.
Okay, go ahead, please. Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So as I said, we would like to see if we can implement VuFind for discovering our online resources, because that will add a lot of value to our end users. What happens is, especially when they're off campus and when they use, they authenticate themselves through Shibboleth IDP, and then they get onto the publisher's platform, but it really doesn't let them know what resources they actually have access to. Because even when you access through Shibboleth, we will be able to access only the subscribed content. So if we can get hold of the metadata of the entire holdings of the library subscription, and if that can be moved into VuFind, that will add a lot of value to the end, as far as the end users are concerned. I mean, that is my understanding, but I don't know how practical or how implementable that plan is. So thanks a lot for listening, and thanks for the organizing team to give me an opportunity to share my experience with VuFind. So at the appropriate time, I'll be happy.
Thank you very much, Francis. And I think the question you are asking regarding the holding information on the electronic resources, as far as I understood it, I think we should probably discuss this later on, maybe in Slack or somewhere, or maybe even on the road mapping session on Thursday, right? So, okay.